What happened to us? You ever sit back and think, why did my parents parent like that? And why were they so strict in some areas and checked out in others? And why did it feel like nobody quite knew what they were doing? I want you to know something up front. Your parents were not parenting in a vacuum. From about the 1940s on, our families have been the testing ground for one social experiment after another. Dr. Spock, zero tolerance policies in schools, no child left behind, Common Core, participation trophies, and then the foundational stuff, marriage redefined, boys and men in girls' bathrooms, gender ideology in classrooms. Every decade came with new promises. This will fix kids. This will fix schools. This will fix society. And now here we are, angry, anxious, divided, and very often blaming our parents without realizing how much they were being pulled around by experts and policies and trends they did not create. So today I'm going to walk you through a few of those parenting in school experiments, not to excuse real harm and not to pretend everything was fine, but to help you see a fuller picture of what shaped them and what's now shaping us. Now, experiment number 1 was Dr. Spock and the new parenting. Now, let's go back to 1946. A pediatrician named Dr. Benjamin Spock publishes a book called The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care. It becomes one of the best-selling parenting books in history. And what was his big message? In the simplest of terms, it was trust your instincts, be more responsive to your child's needs, and don't be so rigid and harsh. Now, to parents who had grown up under very strict, often cold authority, this sounded like fresh air. And their parents, maybe your grandparents, believed spare the rod, spoil the child meant stay distant, stay tough, don't show too much emotion. So Dr. Spock's approach opened the door to more affection, more attention to feelings. Now, that's the positive side. But over time, critics, especially in family and faith circles, started to say, well, wait a minute, this is also undermining parental authority. It fed a more child-centered, permissive style of parenting. The child's preferences start to run the home, and parents begin to doubt their right to lead. And saying no starts to feel almost abusive in itself. So think about that. Boomer parents, the ones being blamed and bashed today, were children raised during a major shift. They grew up in homes wrestling between very strict old school authority and this new softer trust the child message. And if your mom or dad seemed inconsistent, strict in one way, soft in others, it might be because they were living in that tension. The old way and the new way colliding inside the same living room. And that was just the beginning. Experiment number 2, zero tolerance in schools. Now fast forward decades. Now the schools want in on fixing kids. In the 1990s and the 2000s, zero tolerance policy spread through schools. They were supposed to crack down on weapons and drugs and serious misbehaviors. Now, on paper, it sounded reasonable. If you bring something dangerous, if you cross this line, you are out. No exceptions. But it didn't stay limited to serious cases. Zero tolerance started applying to all kinds of things. Research and reports now say zero tolerance policies did not make schools safer overall. They massively increased suspensions and expulsions. They often worsened misbehavior and dropout rates. Minority students were hit disproportionately. In plain language, instead of helping kids, schools were often just kicking them out. Let me give you just one example of how far this went. There was a little boy who was 6 years old in Kissimmee, Florida, who got in trouble over a Pop-Tart. He was eating his breakfast pastry, took a few bites, and the leftover piece roughly looked like a gun. Now he pointed it, made a little bang-bang sound, and the kind of childish cowboys and Indians game that used to be normal on playgrounds. And the school treated it like a weapons incident. He was expelled, written up for using food to make an inappropriate gesture. And his family had to fight to clear his record. Now, that wasn't an isolated story. Kids were getting punished for Lego guns, finger guns, bubble guns, even for just talking about guns. And that's what happens when policy replaces wisdom. Adults stop seeing a 7-year-old or 6-year-old boy and start seeing a liability. And this wasn't just happening out there on the news. It came straight into my own home. Now, at one point, my child's school accused me of physically assaulting one of their coaches. They scheduled a formal hearing to decide whether I would be banned from every future athletic event. The written charges were shocking. They had affidavits from school umpires claiming they had to physically pull me off the coach's back. But there was a problem. Now, let me pause a little bit and tell you where I was in life. I was 8.5 months pregnant, and I was under medical care for a high-risk pregnancy. I had a letter from my doctor stating that it would have been physically impossible for me to do what they were accusing me of. Now, you should have seen their faces when I walked into that hearing, very visibly pregnant. The whole tone of the room changed. The moment they saw me and saw the medical evidence, the case was thrown out. I had never even met that coach before. Now, this all started with an incident involving my child that the school never really investigated. And instead of getting to the root cause of the problem, the blame got dumped on me. Now, my husband and I had to hire an attorney because we were facing the possibility of our child being expelled, and for me as a parent, being reported to Child Protective Services. All of that over a story that wasn't even true. Now, at the end of the day, all of the charges were dropped. But I will never forget that feeling, realizing I was in a system that would rather punish a parent, make an example of me, than humbly admit, well, we got this wrong. And that's what zero tolerance culture did. It didn't just discipline kids, it turned parents into suspects. So imagine being a child in this era. At home, maybe your parents are trying to be more gentle, trying not to be too hard. And at school, the system was, one wrong move and you are gone. No nuance, no context, no conversation. You are not being mentored. You were being managed. Now, experiment number 3. No Child Left Behind and Common Core. Now we add another layer. The big education laws and standards many of you grew up under. First, No Child Left Behind. Now, it passed in 2001, and it said, we are going to improve education. We are going to measure student achievement with regular tests in math and reading, and we are going to hold schools accountable. Again, sounds good, right? Good intentions on the surface. Well, who doesn't want children to read and do math well? Well, who doesn't want kids in disadvantaged communities to get a fair shot? But over time, critics found that education narrowed down to test preparation. Teachers felt enormous pressure to teach to the test. and kids became data points on spreadsheets. And despite all of that, it did not significantly narrow racial achievement gaps on average. And then came Common Core, national standards that rolled out across most of the country. Supporters said this will raise rigor and consistency. But even education scholars who are not conspiracy people have called Common Core one of the largest untested social experiments ever run on children, adopted widely without real field testing with kids as the guinea pigs. So now school looked like this. Constant standardized tests and new standards. Teachers trying to decode and implement shifting requirements. And children absorbing all that pressure. And if you grew up in that era, you probably remember feeling like your worth was tied to a score and less time for creativity, critical thinking, or character building. Adults exhausted and were on edge. And we were measured, not mentored. We were evaluated, not shepherded. And then, experiment number 4, the blue ribbons for everyone's society. While schools were ramping up zero tolerance and testing, another experiment was happening in youth sports and childhood culture. Participation trophies and blue ribbons for everyone. Now, the idea was we don't want kids to feel left out. We want to reward everyone for participating. Again, the heart may have been in the right place. Nobody wants a child humiliated on the sidelines. But we now have research and reflections suggesting that this approach can create a false picture of real life and dampen motivation and determination, and it contributes to entitlement and fragile self-esteem. College-age athletes and parents interviewed in one study said that participation trophies often give kids the idea that simply showing up is enough, and that real-world effort and excellence don't matter in the same way. So again, same pattern, a well-intentioned idea, almost no long-term testing, and kids absorbing the unintended lessons. And experiment number 5, foundational cultural shifts, marriage, and bathrooms, and gender. Then on top of parenting books and school discipline, test regimes, and trophy culture, we started changing the foundations, redefining marriage, allowing biological boys and men into girls' bathrooms and locker rooms in schools, and teaching gender as fluid and self-defined to very young children. Wherever someone lands politically, this much is honest. These changes were rolled out rapidly. There could not possibly have been long-term peer-reviewed evidence about what this would do to children's mental health, their sense of safety or identity before it was implemented. And kids were again in the middle, adjusting in real time. We didn't slowly study the effects over a generation and then adjust. No, we changed categories that humans have lived with for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years in a decade or less, and assumed it would all work out. Now, parents did protest, and many were punished. And I want to say this clearly. Parents did not sleep through all of this. Many mothers and fathers did protest. They went to school board meetings. They wrote letters. They pulled their kids from certain programs. And they asked hard questions about zero tolerance, about blue ribbons for everyone, about Common Core, about what was being taught in health class. And often we were told, you don't understand the research. This is federal and state policy. Our hands are tied. And if you don't comply, there may be consequences for your child. Some were subtle and some directly threatened parents with truancy actions and CPS involvement, or their child being suspended or expelled if they did not fall in line. Now, there were parents who felt cornered. Either go along with systems you don't trust or risk your child's place at school and your family's stability. So when we look back and say, why didn't our parents fight this harder? We need to remember, a lot of us did. A lot of us pushed back, and the weight of the system pushed right back over us. Now, what did all of this do to relationships? Well, let's put this together and talk about what it did to us. It confused parents. And if you are a parent now, imagine this. Experts tell you don't be too strict. Don't say no too often. And schools tell you we will handle discipline, but we might throw your kids out for one mistake. And the government tells you we're going to test your child constantly and judge your school based on those scores. And then culture tells you if you don't affirm every feeling, you are abusive. And if you question any change, you are hateful. Now that's a lot of pressure, and that's a lot of mixed messages. And many moms and dads did what the experts, the schools, and laws told them. Now, as adults, some of us look back and say, hey, they failed me, without realizing how violently the ground was shifting under their feet. And it confused children. We were raised in systems, not truly raised by people. And we got permissiveness without backbone in some places, harsh, impersonal punishment in others, performance pressure and identity confusion layered on top. It's no wonder so many of us developed anxiety and depression and distrust of institutions, deep anger around authority, and the feeling that nobody really saw us, only our behavior, our scores, or our labels. And it set the stage for generational resentment. And right now, there is a whole movement telling adults, your parents ruined you, and they emotionally abandoned you. Everything wrong with you is their fault. Now, again, I am not denying real wounds, and some of you truly did grow up with cruelty, neglect, or chaos, and that needs to be named honestly. But I am saying this. Many of our parents were also being thrown around by currents they didn't control. They were told how to parent by Dr. Spock and all the experts after him. And they were told how to respond to school policies they did not choose. And they were told their child's worth was tied to test results and standards. And they were told that questioning new cultural norms made them bigots. And now they are being blamed as if they invented all of it on their own. But that doesn't mean they got it right. It means the picture is more complicated than my parents were just bad. So where does that leave us? Well, I want to offer 3 invitations, but from a place, not from a place of denial, but from a place of wanting real healing and not just louder anger. Invitation number 1, tell the whole story, not just the shallow one. Now, the shallow story is this: my parents were just terrible. End of story. The deeper story is my parents were imperfect humans, shaped by their own upbringing and by the trends and policies of their time. They made real mistakes, and some of those wounded me. And yet, there were also pressures and lies they were living under. Telling the fuller story doesn't excuse sin or harm. It just keeps you from shrinking everything down to a villain story. Villain stories feel good for a moment, but they don't heal you. And invitation number 2, honor sacrifice, even when it was clumsy. Now, some of your parents worked exhausting jobs, 40, 50, even 60 hours a week, and they try to navigate confusing school systems, bought into ideas they truly thought would help you. Now, maybe they were too permissive in some ways, too harsh in others, and maybe they didn't have the emotional tools you wish they had. You are allowed to grieve what you didn't get. And you are allowed to say, well, that hurt me, that left a mark. But you are also invited to notice what they did give. Showing up to work when they wanted to give up, fighting with the school for you, trying to follow what they were told was good parenting in that era. It is possible to say, you hurt me here and you sacrificed for me there, and both can be true. And invitation number 3, refuse to run the next experiment on your own children. And here's the sobering part. Right now, you and I are being sold new experiments, extreme versions of gentle parenting that pretend no child should ever be distressed, the normalization of no contact with parents and grandparents as a trendy first resort, and identity-based politics that tell you to sort the world into oppressors and victims, online therapists and coaches who may have not even be qualified, giving sweeping advice to millions. Now, we can repeat the pattern, or we can step off the treadmill. And stepping off looks like this: choosing a more stable foundation for family than whatever is trending this week, and recognizing that kids need loving authority, not either harsh punishment or endless negotiation. And accepting that no system, policy, or influencer will ever replace the slow, humble work of actual relationships. And for those of you who are Christians, you know where I'd point to. I point to God's unchanging wisdom about family, about discipline and love, about honoring parents and protecting children. And for those of you who aren't sure what you believe, I want to at least invite you to this. Don't let the latest trend, whether it's from 1946 or 2026, to be the loudest voice telling you who your parents were or who you must be. You are more than the era you were raised in. And your children deserve more than to be the next generation of test subjects. Now, if this helped you make sense of your story, even a little, I'd love for you to share it with someone who is stuck in pure blame. Someone who's never been told, hey, there's a bigger picture here. Your pain matters, and so does context. Now, in the next video, I want to talk about our generation's experiments, the rise of no contact, the online therapy explosion, and how easy it is to turn your children into the next case study in a cultural lab. And if you want to walk through that with me, make sure you are subscribed and leave a comment below. Tell me, what did your parents get right, even if they didn't know what they were doing? And what are you determined not to repeat? Well, thank you for being here. You are not crazy for asking what happened to us. You're just finally zooming out far enough to see the whole picture. And that is where real healing can start.